Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Tuesday, the 17th of December. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm here with a run through or an update on today's news. And today is 1028th day of the Ukraine war. President-elect Donald Trump on Monday suggested he may reverse Joe Biden's recent decision to allow Ukrainian forces to use American long-range weapons to strike deeper into Russian territory. Trump called the decision by Biden stupid. Asked if he would consider reversing the decision, Trump responded, "I might. I think it was a very stupid thing to do." The White House pushed back, noting that the decision was made after months of deliberations that started before last month's election. The White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said, "All I can assure you is that in the conversations we've had with them since the election, and we've had at various levels, we have articulated to them the logic behind it, the thinking behind it, why we're doing it." North Korean troops have been killed during combat against Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk border region, according to Ukraine's military intelligence agency and the Pentagon. The deaths are the first reported since the US and Ukraine announced that North Korea had spent 10,000 to 12,000 troops to Russia. The White House said it now believed North Korean troops were on the front lines of Russia's war and were actively engaged in combat operations against Ukraine. German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius said on Monday his country would likely play a role in securing a future ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine, but that it was far too early to tell what a peacekeeping force might look like. If there is a ceasefire, then of course the Western community, NATO partners, potentially the United Nations, and the European Union will have to discuss how such a ceasefire can be secured, he said, and it is obvious that Germany, as Europe's biggest economy, would play a role there. He underlined it also needed to be clear that both Ukraine and Russia accepted such a mandate. On Monday, a Russian military court sentenced 23-year-old Vasily Kharkov to 19 years in prison after finding him guilty of treason, attempted sabotage on strategic infrastructure, as well as joining a terrorist group. Ukraine has called on the international community to take action against Russia's sanctions-busting oil fleet after an aging tanker sank in the Black Sea, causing an environmental disaster. Keir Starmer is to visit British troops serving on Russia's border after saying that Ukraine will require more funding and capability. The Prime Minister was speaking at the Joint Expeditionary Forces, that's the JEF conference in Estonia, where he met leaders of other Baltic states. Sergei Karakayev, a senior Russian military commander, has claimed Russia is boosting its ballistic arsenal with new strategic missile systems, plans maximum range launches, and may increase testing in response to growing external threats. He claimed Russia was developing a new intercontinental ballistic missile system, the Osina. Vladimir Putin has said Russia will soon start mass-producing the Orshnik ballistic missile, apparently backtracking from his earlier suggestions that it was already in production and could be fired again at a time of Russia's choosing. Russia struck Ukraine in November with an Oreshnik. On Monday, a former FBI informant admitted to making up a story that Joe Biden and his son Hunter had taken $5 million in bribes from a Ukrainian energy firm. Alexander Smirnov, aged 44, pleaded guilty to creating a false record in a federal investigation, as well as 3 counts of tax evasion for failing to pay taxes and penalties on $2.1 million in income for 2020 to 2022. Russian-born Smirnov, a dual US-Israeli citizen, faces up to 6 years in prison under a plea deal. And now the latest from the Middle East. At least 45,059 Palestinians have been killed and 107,041 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, the Gaza Health Ministry said in a statement. Of those, 31 Palestinians were killed and 79 injured in the latest 24-hour reporting period, the ministry said. Hamas has said ceasefire talks in Qatar aimed at a truce and hostage prisoner exchange in Gaza were serious and positive, while White House National Security Communications spokesperson John Kirby said, We believe we are getting closer to a Gaza ceasefire deal. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's spokesperson denied reports that he is in Cairo for Gaza ceasefire talks. Netanyahu was holding a briefing on Mount Hermon, a strategic location overlooking Damascus, a statement made from the Prime Minister's office said. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz said his country's forces will maintain security control over the devastated Gaza Strip even after the war is over, with Israeli soldiers able to act with full freedom of action over the territory. And Israeli lawmakers narrowly approved the country's 2025 state budget in an initial vote. The 59 to 57 vote in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, to pass the wartime austerity budget in its first of 3 readings. A UN refugee agency official said that about 1 million Syrian refugees are expected to return to the country in the first 6 months of 2025, with thousands of people already having returned to the country, mostly from Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan. The military on Tuesday said it bombed a Houthi military facility in Yemen's capital, Sana'a, in what was the latest US-led attack on the Iranian-backed rebels. The Houthi media office said the airstrike hit part of the sprawling complex that houses the rebels' defence ministry. Irish President Michael D. Higgins has said that to say the Irish people are anti-Semitic is a gross defamation and slander, and it is a very serious business to do so simply because people disagree with the actions of the Israeli Prime Minister. The next item is WASPy women affected by the rising state pension age will not get compensation, the government has announced, with the Prime Minister arguing it would be wrong to burden the taxpayer. Keir Starmer was asked about the issue in Estonia after the Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall told MPs she was rejecting the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's recommendation for compensation to be paid. The chair of the Women Against State Pension Inequality, or WASPy campaign, Angela Madden, responded with fury to the government's decision. This is a bizarre and totally unjustified move which will leave everyone asking what the point of an ombudsman is if ministers can simply ignore their decisions. It feels like a decision that would make the likes of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump blush, she said. Speaking in the House of Commons on Tuesday, Kendall accepted the findings of the Ombudsman in a report earlier this year that her department failed to communicate the change adequately, but she rejected its recommendation for a flat-rate compensation scheme, paying out £1,000 to £2,950 to the more than 3 million women affected. In the House of Commons, Liz Kendall angered SNP MPs when she told Stephen Flynn MP that the Scottish Government could vote to compensate the WASPy women. Commenting, SNP DWP spokesperson Kirsty Blackman MP said, "This Labour government announcement is a devastating betrayal of the millions of WASPy women who have spent years campaigning for justice. Having been let down for so many years by successive Tory governments, there was a sense that Labour might finally live up to their promise of change. But instead, Labour has confirmed that they will betray those women and pull yet another shady Westminster trick." First Minister John Swinney described the UK government decision to reject the independent recommendation on compensation for the WASPy women as another betrayal of pensioners by the Labour government and another embarrassment for Scottish Labour. Mr Swinney said, "Older people in Scotland have been let down yet again by this UK government. Fresh from cutting the winter fuel payment as our pensioners battle sub-zero temperatures, the Labour government has now betrayed the millions of women who have spent so many years campaigning for what they are due." He went on to say, "We are taking action to clean up the UK government's mess on the winter fuel payment by bringing forward universal winter heating support in our budget. We have listened to older people in Scotland and we are taking action. That is what you can expect from a Swinney government." He said, "This is not just a shameful episode for the UK government, it is yet another serious embarrassment for the Labour leadership in Scotland. The choice for Scottish Labour is, will they do the right thing and stand up for older people in Scotland, or will they stand up for the Prime Minister?" Audit Scotland has said that the future of the publicly owned Ferguson Marine Port Glasgow shipyard, or the FMPG, is uncertain, with no more work secured beyond the completion of the MV Glen Rosa. Setting out their assessment in their report, Audit Scotland said that FMPG has now handed over the delayed MV Glen Sannox, with MV Glen Rosa currently due to be delivered in September 2025. However, there are multiple risks to the continued costs of completing MV Glen Rosa. Ongoing investment is needed to make the yard competitive and generate future income. The report says that the FMPG currently has no contracts for work following the two ferries. The only guaranteed income is funding from the Scottish Government up to 2026. The report found that the yard's business plan to 2029 had assumed direct award for the Scottish Government Small Vessel Replacement Programme. This wasn't possible due to UK subsidy laws. FMPG is now one of 6 firms invited to tender for the contract. Auditors have raised serious concerns over poor governance and decision making. No decision was provided as to how FMPG decided to award 2 employee exit packages. Both were above the £95,000 public sector threshold set out in the Scottish Public Finance Manual, which provides guidance on the proper handling and reporting of public funds. These payments were made out without the required ministerial views. Audit Scotland called for the failings and weaknesses in the yard's control and governance arrangements to be addressed. Commenting on Audit Scotland's report on Ferguson Marine, Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes said, "The Scottish Government is committed to helping Ferguson Marine reach a position where it can competitively bid for a range of projects and build a sustainable future." She continued, "Officials have been working with the board to explore options to improve productivity and, as previously set out, we are willing to invest up to £14.2 million over 2 years, subject to due diligence and provided commercial standards are met." She said, "The draft 2025-26 Scottish Budget allocates £46 million to Ferguson Marine for the completion of Glen Rosa and to cover the yard's planned capital investment, subject to parliamentary approval." She went on to say, "While we are already working with Ferguson Marine to strengthen governance arrangements, we note the Auditor General's report and expect the board to carefully consider the points it raises." New research has revealed that Scottish businesses trust the SNP more than Labour. According to the quarterly Understanding Business Survey conducted by 56 Degrees North and the Diffley Partnership, 48% of businesses believe the Scottish Government understands their concerns. It is the highest level recorded since the survey, which more than 600 companies responded to, was the first published. In contrast, the UK Labour government polled only slightly up on the previous Tory government at 31%. The survey showed that Scottish companies are concerned about the impact of Labour's decision to increase employers' national insurance contributions, or NIC, which come into force in April. The majority of respondents warned that rising costs, including the NIC hike and energy price rises, will cause them to increase their prices and that they may also look at reducing workforce numbers. Michelle Thompson, MSP, said, "It's no surprise that businesses are losing faith in Labour already. Keir Starmer promised to kickstart economic growth, but figures out last week show that the UK economy has flatlined since he came to power." She went on to say that Labour also promised that there would be no tax rises, but the hike in the NICs announced in their first budget is causing businesses to make tough decisions and will inevitably result in lower wages, growth stalling and job losses. She said businesses also face the prospect of energy prices rising yet again in the new year, despite Labour repeatedly promising to bring them down. In contrast, John Swinney has listened to business concern and made economic growth one of his government's key priorities. The SNP Scottish Government sets the transformative investment proposals to grow the economy. It is imperative that opposition parties support the budget to deliver support for businesses and economic growth, she said. The First Minister has published a new edition of the Scottish Ministerial Code, further strengthening the processes to support transparency, accountability and independent scrutiny. The The new code includes an enhanced role for independent advisors, which allows them to initiate investigations into alleged breaches of the ministerial code when they feel it is warranted and without a direct referral from the First Minister. If a breach is established, advisors will be able to recommend appropriate sanctions. In addition, the advisors will play a role in reviewing the processes in place to manage the annual review of ministers' declarations of interest. The terms of reference for the advisors also has published for the first time. First Minister John Swinney said, "The updated Scottish Ministerial Code, my first as First Minister, contains the most significant changes since 2008. He went on to say the strengthening of the code gives a clear focus on public service and duty, and the enhanced role of the independent advisors assures greater scrutiny, transparency and accountability." He said the new independent advisors, Claire Loftus, Sir John Manzoni and Sir Ernest Ryder, will provide invaluable advice and recommendations to me, ensuring ministers are acting at the very high standards of integrity and propriety. My thanks to former independent advisors Lady Elish Angiolini and James Hamilton for their many years of public service. The Police Service of Northern Ireland and the Metropolitan Police unlawfully spied on two investigative journalists, a tribunal has found in a landmark judgment. The Investigatory Powers Tribunal ruled that the PSNI must pay £4,000 each in damages to Trevor Burnley and Barry McCaffrey, who were arrested in 2018 after they produced No Stone Unturned, an award-winning documentary about a notorious massacre during the Troubles. It found that the Met unlawfully put McCaffrey under surveillance in 2012, while the PSNI was found to have done so in 2013. The tribunal also quashed a 2018 direct surveillance authorisation targeting the Belfast-based journalists on the same day they were arrested and their suspected source, the first time it is believed to have taken such action. The case was the first in which the tribunal has ordered a police force to pay damages to journalists for unlawful intrusion. No Stone Unturned documented apparent collusion between the police and suspected murderers in 1994 Loughin Island massacre, in which 6 Catholic men were killed by loyalist paramilitaries. The subsequent arrest of the journalists over 2 leaked documents that appeared in the film was ruled unlawful by Northern Ireland's top judge in 2019. The same year, Burnley and McCaffrey issued proceedings at the tribunal based on their suspicions that the arrest warrants were not the only attempt made to identify their confidential sources. On Tuesday, the tribunal, which conducts most of its proceedings behind closed doors and is the only UK court with the power to rule on covert surveillance operations by the intelligence agencies and the police, found in their favour. In its judgment, the IPT, chaired by Lord Justice Singh, sitting at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, said, "We will quash the DSA, that's the Direct Service Authorisation. We have determined that a declaration of its unlawfulness would not be sufficient to afford the claimant's just satisfaction in respect of its incompatibility with the rights. Would not be sufficient to afford the claimant's just satisfaction in respect of its incompatibility with the rights protected by Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which protects freedom of expression." It said that the Chief Constable of PSNI at the time, Sir George Hamilton, had acted unlawfully as he did not consider whether there was an overriding public interest justifying an interference with the integrity of a journalistic source. The unlawful surveillance began 6 years prior to the journalist's arrests and 5 years before No Stone Unturned was released, when the Met made applications for communications data relating to 8 telephone numbers, one of which was McCaffrey's. Reacting to the judgment, Burnley said, "We are delighted after 6 years that we've got this victory, but this isn't so much for us, it's about journalism throughout the UK. McCaffrey said, "Despite all of their efforts, the police were still unable to identify our sources for the film. They wasted police time and resources going after us instead of the Loughin Island killers." Both men have called for an inquiry. On Monday, a judge ruled that Donald Trump's conviction for falsifying records to cover up a sex scandal should stand, rejecting the president-elect's argument that it should be dismissed because of the US Supreme Court's recent ruling on presidential immunity, a court filing showed. Manhattan Judge Juan Merchan's decision eliminates one potential off-ramp from the case ahead of Trump's return to office next month. His lawyers have raised another arguments for dismissal. In a 41-page decision, Merchan said Trump's decidedly personal acts of falsifying business records poses no danger of intrusion on the authority and function of the executive branch. Prosecutors have said there should be some accommodation for his upcoming presidency, but they insist the conviction should stand. A jury convicted Trump in May of 34 counts of falsifying business records related to a $130,000 hush money payment to the adult film actor Stormy Daniels in 2016. The payment was for her silence before the 2016 election about a sexual encounter she has said she had a decade earlier with Trump, who denies it. It was the first time a US president, former or sitting, had been convicted of or charged with a criminal offence. The allegations involved a scheme to hide the payout to Daniels during the final days of Trump's 2016 presidential campaign to keep her from publicising and to keep voters from hearing her claim of a sexual encounter. He says nothing sexual happened between them. Trump pleaded not guilty and called the case an attempt by Bragg, a Democrat, to harm his 2024 campaign. A month after the verdict, the Supreme Court ruled that ex-presidents can't be prosecuted for official acts, things they did in the course of running the country, and that prosecutors cannot cite these actions to bolster a case centred on purely personal, unofficial conduct. In his ruling, Merchan denied the bulk of Trump's claims that some of prosecutors' evidence related to official acts and implicated immunity protections. The judge said that even if he found that some evidence related to official conduct, he'd still find that prosecutors' decision to use these acts as evidence of the decidedly personal acts of falsifying business records poses no danger of intrusion on the authority and function of the executive branch. Even if prosecutors had erroneously introduced evidence that could be challenged under an immunity claim, Merchan continued, such error was harmless in light of the overwhelming evidence of guilt. Updated Scottish Government analysis of relevant labour market estimates has been published. The HMRC early estimates show 2.46 million payrolled employees in Scotland in November 2024. That's 2,000 less than the number of payrolled employees in the previous month, October 2024, and largely unchanged since November 2023. Estimates for November 2024 should be treated as provisional and are likely to be revised when more data is received next month. In August to October 2024, Scotland's employment rate estimate of 16 to 64-year-olds was 73.2%. The unemployment rate estimate, 16 plus years, was 3.6%, and the inactivity rate estimate for 16 to 64-year-olds was 24% in the same period. Commenting on the HMRC and ONS labour market statistics, Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Gaelic, Kate Forbes, said, "There are encouraging signs of growth in Scotland's economy, with unemployment appearing to fall, payrolled employment at near record levels, and higher median monthly pay than the rest of the UK." She went on to say, "Our draft budget for next year was developed in partnership with businesses to accelerate growth. It also sets out £90 million for Scotland's devolved employability service to help more people into work. This includes the introduction of specialist employability support by summer 2025 to ensure that enhanced services are in place for disabled people and those with long-term health conditions as part of our plans to tackle economic activity." Legislation which will enhance Scotland's democratic processes has been backed unanimously by the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Elections Representation and Reform Bill has passed its final stage, maintaining and improving Scotland's robust electoral system. The bill contains a mix of technical and other improvements, such as improving candidate and campaigner safety and advancing candidacy rights. The new law introduces a ban on people from being MSPs if they are convicted of a sexual offence or subject to a sexual offence order. In addition, MSPs will be barred from also being an MP or peer through regulations to be brought forward in 2025 so they can be in place in time for the 2026 Scottish elections. The details of the regulations will be informed through a consultation beginning next month. Parliamentary Business Minister Jamie Hepburn said, "Since 1999 the Scottish Parliament has improved participation, extended voting rights and enabled more people to stand for election, and this legislation seeks to continue the evolution of our democracy." He went on to say, "It will modernise Scottish elections and take important steps to safeguard our democracy for voters, candidates and administrators." He said, "Through positive cross-party working, we have agreed a robust set of improvements to the law which will deliver real benefits to voters and prospective candidates." SP Energy Networks has announced a £10.6 billion plan to help rewire the UK and deliver the critical electricity infrastructure needed for decades to come as it submits its RIIOT3 business plan to Ofgem. The business plan covers the next price control period from 2026 to 31 and will deliver new and upgraded transmission infrastructure in central and southern Scotland, including 12 new major transmission substations, 450 kilometres of upgraded existing circuits, 87 kilometres of upgraded overhead lines and 35 kilometres of underground cables, all to help increase capacity on the GB transmission grid to meet demand. The plan also outlines a programme of investment to further increase network resilience, maintaining existing assets and help connect up to 19 gigawatts of new clean green power to the grid, as well as contributing to reduce constraint costs, leading to a £167 saving per household every year by 2030. SP Energy Networks plans to double its transmission workforce with around 1,400 new directly employed jobs and supporting another 11,000 more jobs across the UK. This is a step in transmission investment over 3 times more than the £3.4 billion of the RIIOT2 plan. Independent research by the Centre for Energy Policy at the University of Strathclyde has found that the business plan could contribute sustained economic benefit of £2 billion each year to UK society. Also included in SP Energy Networks' business plan is a proposed £20 million net zero fund to build on the success of its current £5 million fund. Working with community organisations and charities, the fund will deliver vital monies to enable local decarbonisation initiatives, as well as providing support and guidance to help communities prepare for and deliver their own net zero plans and projects. Former First Minister Humza Yousaf has announced that he is standing down as an MSP. In a post on X this morning, Mr Yousaf confirmed that he would be standing down as MSP for Glasgow Pollock at the 2026 Scottish general election. In a letter to John Swinney, Mr Yousaf said that come 2026 he will have served 15 years as an MSP, 12 of those years as a minister in the Scottish Government. Mr Yousaf said, "The next Scottish Parliament elections in 2026 will be the right time for me to move on, to provide an opportunity for the next generation of MSPs to step forward and to explore where I can best make a contribution in the future in helping to tackle some of the most pressing challenges our world faces." He went on to say, "There is no way the son of immigrants could ever have dreamt of being the leader of this country when he was a boy. People who looked like me and who were of my faith simply were not represented on the front benches in politics anywhere in the UK." Reflecting on his time in office, Mr Yousaf said, "During my time in government, including as First Minister, I have always been driven by my desire to improve the lives of the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. It is a principle that will guide me in whatever I do next." He went on to say, In government, I was proud to have significantly increased our budget for active travel, laid the groundwork for taking ScotRail back into public ownership, and oversaw the completion of the Queen's Ferry crossing. I brought forward greater protections for domestic abuse survivors, minorities, and victims, and agreed to pardon miners who were convicted during the 1984 miners' strike. I was pleased to oversee record NHS investment, our leading vaccination programme during COVID, and ensure Scotland was the only nation in the UK to avoid NHS strikes as a result of negotiating a fair pay deal with NHS staff. However, as well as important domestic matters, he said, I have always believed that Scotland should be a good global citizen, contributing to help solve the biggest challenges humanity faces, as well as standing in solidarity with those suffering grave injustices across the world. As First Minister, I hope I was able to demonstrate leadership during what I view was the moral question of our time: the ongoing atrocities and war crimes being committed in Gaza. He said, there should also be no doubt that whatever I do next, I'll say that again. He said, there should also be no doubt that whatever I do next, I will continue to be a devoted campaigner. Mr. Yousaf ended by saying, lastly, and certainly most importantly, I would be nowhere without the support of my family, and in particular the love and guidance that Nadia has given me, and the sacrifices she has made for our family over the years. He added, I owe her a debt I suspect will never be able to repay, but I shall certainly try my best. Responding, First Minister John Swinney said, I'm sorry to see Humza Yousaf standing down as an MSP at the next election. He has been a pioneer in Scottish politics. I value all he has contributed to the Scottish Government and the SNP over many years, and look forward to his continued involvement as Scotland progresses to independence. He said, Humza showed what a principled man he is by being one of the first world leaders to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza at the outset of the conflict. I wish him, Nadia, and their family much peace together and all the best for whatever comes next in the future. Well, that's it for tonight's show, but just before I go, I wanted to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we still depend on the generosity of you, our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We set our current fundraising target in April, hoping to reach £36,000 by the end of the year. It's now December and we've raised over £19,600. Just half of our target, however. To pay our bills and survive, we urgently need to raise at least £12,000 more. We have borrowed £12,000 to enable us to survive for now, but the pressure is still on and we still need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but we only receive donations of around £2,500, for which we are grateful, but we need more regular subscribers. We need to be clear, and we need to clear our debts as well. We are at crisis point and really need to increase our donations to be able to pay our bills and survive. You know that our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please donate whatever you can afford. So thank you and goodbye. Thank you for watching.